Hey all you cats and chicks out there, welcome back to Control Players Unite. I'm your host, Dr. Red. Today we're going to be going over on playing Control in the Pokemon trading card game. First, an overview. We're going to go over the three playstyles. Then we're going to cover Control strategy, which involves lots of vocabulary. Then there's a quick note on non-control cards in Control builds. And then we're going to go over the kinds of Control builds that exist, which might be considered controversial. Three playstyles and base strategies. First we have aggressive, also called aggro. It's any deck whose primary win condition is powerfully attacking one's opponent to the point of knockout and the taking of 6 prizes. For example, Charizard EX. Charge up Burning Darkness, start attacking, and take prizes. Next we have mill. It's any deck whose primary win condition is eliminating the opponent's deck, which is also called decking out. If you cannot draw a card at the start of your turn, you lose. The number 1 archetype at this time is Great Tusk, Land Collapse. Discard the top card of your opponent's deck. But if you play an Ancient Supporter card from your hand, you can discard 3 more cards, so it's up to 4 cards a turn. Then we have Control. The third playstyle, it's any deck whose primary win condition is neither of the above, rather to force the opponent into concession due to an exhaustion and or frustration of resources, i.e. they run out or cannot use them, or they even refuse to use them because they are so incredibly frustrated to begin with. Now, the one thing you must know, ladies and gentlemen, is that no matter your control deck, your strategy revolves around prevention. You are trying to stop your opponent from doing things, in contrast with aggro and mill's goals. There are 4 main categories here, the first of which is denial. Denial is a specific action that cannot be taken. For example, Ralt has Memory Skip. Choose one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks. During your opponent's next turn, that Pokemon can't use that attack. You are denying your opponent. Next is Disruption. This is forcing an extra step in the flow of your opponent's turn. For example, Crushing Hammer. Flip a coin. If heads, discard an energy from one of your opponent's Pokemon. You're forcing your opponent to find more resources and thus take an extra turn or 2 to get set up. Third is Invulnerability. This is damage and or effects being null against your Pokemon. For example, Mimikyu. The Safeguard ability blocks all damage from your opponent's Pokemon EX and V. Last is Stall. This is waiting your opponent out. Block Snorlax. As long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, your opponent's active Pokemon can't retreat. You're trying to wait out your opponent. All strategies revolve around these 4 things, and as you can expect, there is overlap amongst them. So the first one I grouped together, ladies and gentlemen, ABD, Ability, Board, and Damage. Ability Prevention is also called Ability Lock. Your opponent can't use the ability he or she wants to use. Under Board, you have Board Lock. This is the inability of a player to change the board state, such as Jirachi. The ability Stellar Veil prevents damage counters from being placed on your benched Pokemon by effects of attacks by your opponent's basic Pokemon. So your opponent wants to change the board state by taking prizes and you're locking them out of it. Next is Bench Lock, the inability of a player to add another Pokemon to the playfield due to a full bench. This is Manaphy's Pulling Currents attack. Your opponent reveals their hand, put up to 2 basic Pokemon you find there onto your opponent's bench. Next is Evolution Lock, the inability to evolve. Bronzong's Evolution Jammer, for example. During your opponent's next turn, they can't play any Pokemon from their hand to evolve their Pokemon. Next, we have Walls, which are also called immunities. That's just invulnerability. And then Damage Prevention is also invulnerability. Next, we have Attack Cost Increase. Your opponent's attacks cost at least 1 energy more. Espathra EX's Dazzling Gaze ability increases your opponent's active Pokemon's attack cost by 1 colorless, as does Pokemon League Headquarters, but it does this for both players, not just your opponent. Card Locking, the prevention of specific cards from being played. The big one right now is Venomoth. Perplexing Powder prevents item cards from being played from your opponent's hand. Then you have Crobat's Echoing Madness attack, which you can choose either item or supporters. Deck Manipulation and Knowledge. This is modifying the order of your opponent's cards in deck, knowledge of cards in the opponent's deck. For example, Gothitel's Read the Stars ability Once during your turn, you may look at the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck, put one of them back, and put the other one at the bottom of their deck. You also have Malamar, Psychic Insight. You may look at the top card of your opponent's deck and then look at your own top card. Energy Manipulation. This is when you modify the placement or location of the opponent's energy. Mawile, Special Eater. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may discard a special energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. Bouffalant, Lost Headbutt. Put an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon in the Lost Zone. There's also an extremely important supporter here called Giacomo, which will discard a special energy from each of your opponent's Pokemon. The next strategy in the control player's tool belt is Gust, where you move the opponent's Pokemon from the bench to the active, the most popular of which is Boss's Orders. This is in virtually every deck. The other one is Counter Catcher, where you can do the same thing, but only for behind on prizes. This was a reprint, much to the chagrin of control players. And even aggro decks have the occasional copy or two in them. The next strategy is Hand Manipulation and Knowledge, modifying your opponent's cards in their hand and knowledge of cards in the opponent's hand. For example, Masquerain, flip a coin till you get tails for each heads, discard a random card from your opponent's hand. Zubat, once during your turn, if this opponent is in the active, you can have your opponent reveal their hand. As you can tell, ladies and gentlemen, these are just some examples. This is not every single good card that are typically used. I chose these cards because they don't get any attention, and it's an example of how the strategy works. Health or tanking. This is a combination of high HP Pokemon, damage prevention abilities and effects, and healing cards. So for example, Wigglytuff EX, its expanding body ability. If this Pokemon has any special energy attached, it gets 100 HP. So it goes from 250 to 350. Then you put the Hero's Cape tool on it, and it gets another 100 HP. So it's at 450 HP. If it takes any damage or is close to being KO'd, you can use Sharon's Care. Put one of your colorless Pokemon that has any damage counters on it and all attached cards into your hand. So if Wigglytuff EX is sitting at 400, you can just take it in your hand, and that's not a KO for your opponent. If you're setting up another one on your bench, it's that much easier to get set up into the active spot to start hopefully taking KOs if that's your goal. So health and tanking is considered control to the effect that you're preventing your opponent from taking prizes. Mill or deck out, we went over this, to discard cards from your opponent's deck, to leave your opponent without any cards at the start of your turn. Misfortune Sisters is one of the most popular. You look at the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck and discard any item cards you find there. Chi-Yu EX, it's a staple in Snorlax block. Jealousy Singe discards the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. Prize Denial. This is the prevention of the opponent taking a prize for a knockout. Baby Glamora, Shattering Crystal. When this Pokemon is knocked out, flip a coin. If heads, your opponent can't take any prize cards for it. Machamp's Guts ability. If it's knocked out by damage from an attack, flip a coin. If heads, it's not knocked out, its remaining HP becomes 10. Then you have Retreat Lock. This is the prevention of hard retreating. Spidops EX has the Trap Territory ability. It's when your opponent's active Pokemon's retreat cost is 1 colorless more. So if it has 0, it's 1. If it has 3, it's 4, etc. Mawile. This is one of the most popular one of the most popular cards in Control right now. Tempting Trap. During your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat. This is great because if your opponent tries to gust you up with a boss's orders, the Pokemon in the active cannot retreat, so you have a chance to get Mawile back into the active. Then we have Shuffle and Discard Away. This is one of my personal favorites. Shuffling the opponent's active Pokemon into the deck, discarding it, or moving it into the opponent's hand. There's one called Staraptor with Strong Breeze. Your opponent shuffles their active Pokemon and all attached cards into their deck. Then there's Golduck with Entangled Dive. Discard each player's active Pokemon and all attached cards. Now, that's the gist of the strategy for Control. I just want to have a quick note here on the inclusion of non-control cards as Control. You have all sorts of cards here. Draw cards like Rotom V, with its instant charge ability to draw 3 per turn. You have damage counter cards like Mewtwo, Reflective Barrier. During your opponent's next turn, if it's damaged by an attack, you put damage counters on the attacking Pokemon equal to the damage done to this Pokemon. The reason why we might consider that Control, ladies and gentlemen, is because it gets your opponent to think twice of how to go around it or how to attack it. You have search cards like Pidgeot EX with its quick search ability, status effect cards like Spinda that inflict confusion, then trainer retrieval cards like Regieleki that put a trainer card from your discard pile into your hand. All of this, ladies and gentlemen, is to say that control has a lot of variety and potential, so don't be afraid to explore and build your own unique deck. Now we have kinds of control. First, we have a note on control versus stall. You'll see what I mean here in a second. Then we have traditional control, if there is such a thing. Then we have aggro mill, mill control, and aggro control, which is what I really want to go over here. First, we have this note on control versus stall. Justin Basil is one of the premier Pokemon translators and knowledge collectors on the internet. He has these two snippets here from his website, Control and Stall, under the deck strategy section. And under Control, he writes that it can execute a second strategy like Stall or Aggression. And then under the Stall component, he says that the purpose of Stall is to deny the opponent the ability to take prize cards. But what I find is that he's saying these are not equal, which is why they are separate categories to begin with, and I want to challenge that. I think they are the same in the sense that this circle represents all control decks, and Stall is a kind of control. So if you have a Stall deck, you have a control deck, so they are in fact equal. I just wanted to put that out there to clarify something I think that needs to be clarified. Next, we have control, traditional control, any deck that focuses on frustrating the opponent into submission. This is basically the definition we gave at the beginning. It ranges from basic to complex, like Snorlax Stall and Sanders Penny Loop. You all know what Snorlax Stall is. Put in the active, your opponent can't retreat. Sanders Penny Loop involved putting Ursaluna V into the active spot. It has the hard code ability, allowing it to take 30 less damage from attacks, so its HP is effectively 260. You would then play the supporter Penny, put one of your basic Pokemon and all attached cards into your hand. It also gets rid of damage. And then from the bench that same turn, you would have had Mimikyu V, which is now rotated. The Dummy Doll ability allows you to prevent all damage done to this card by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon until the end of your opponent's next turn. So it's basically like invulnerability for a whole turn. And then the invulnerability would wear off, you'd play Penny and put Ursaluna V back in the active to collect damage again. That's what Sander did, and he was very successful with it. Next, we have aggro mill. Is this a thing? I think it is. I think it can be. It's half aggressive, half mill. Its win condition is either to take prizes or deck out. Example is Lugia V-Star when paired with Whiscash. Lugia V-Star's Summoning Star ability would put Archeops on the bench. You would use Archeops' ability to put the reversal energy onto Whiscash, assuming you are down a prize, of course. Raging and Rocking on Whiscash, ladies and gentlemen, reads, for each fighting energy attached to this Pokemon, discard the top card of your opponent's deck. If that didn't work for a victory, you just use Lugia V-Star to take prizes that way. Next, we have Mill Control. Is this a thing? Once again, I think it's possible. There's half Mill, half Control. The win condition is either deck out or Exhaustion Frustration. This was the Ursaluna deck we saw in the Champions League Fukuoka in Japan, where a player used Ursaluna's Pete Hunt to put up to 2 cards from the discard pile into his hand, and he paired this with Chandelure, Mountain Roasting ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may discard the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. Chandelure is a stage 2. The player would put the stage 1 Litwick down. It would then use a rare candy. He would then use a rare candy to evolve Chandelure, and then during his turn, he would use Professor Suro's scenario to pick up Chandelure and Litwick, put into his hand, put down the basic Litwick again, and then use Pete Hunt to get the rare candy and Suro back into his hand and loop it until his opponent would deck out. That's the mill component, and he was controlling them otherwise. Next, we have aggro control. Is this a thing? Half aggressive, half control. The win condition is either prize or Exhaustion Frustration. Now, please know, ladies and gentlemen, what I say here might be considered controversial because some people are very particular about saying there's just control, only control. They don't want to mix anything. But I think aggro control is worthy of our consideration because I think it opens up a lot of possibilities for how we think about control decks in the Pokemon TCG, as do the other types, of course, too. But this one in particular. because I think there's more possibilities than the other types. Thinking of something like Hisui and Goodra V-Star. Its Rolling Iron attack does 200 damage. The effect is that during the opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 80 less damage from attacks, so it's tanking, and its Moisture Star ability allows you to heal all damage from the Pokemon. So if it has a high amount of damage, heal it like it's nothing. So it's healing, tanking, and doing damage. Now, this is, frankly, I think aggro control. You could take Azul GG's position and just say that it's mid, but I think there's more to this idea of aggro control than just Hisui and Goodra V-Star. For example, Venusaur EX, you can heal with its Tranquil Flower ability, and then you have Dangerous Toxwhip for 150 plus Confusion and Poison. Alolan Vulpix V-Star, which we see in control decks / aggro control decks all the time. Snow Mirage. This attack's damage isn't affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon, and during your opponent's next turn, you prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by Pokemon that have an ability. Glaceon V-Star, Icicle Shot. The defending Pokemon can't retreat. Crystal Star, prevent all damage and effects of attacks done to this Pokemon. Serena EX, you have damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon until its remaining HP is 30. Then Chop Kick heals 30. Kazam EX is extremely unique. It can attack from the bench with Dimensional Hand. Bayonet EX, which is a card locking type of Pokemon, which is why I didn't mention it before. I wanted to mention it here. Everlasting Darkness, during your opponent's next turn, they can't play item cards. Arbok EX has a retreat lock attack, and also Menacing Fangs will discard 2 of your opponent's cards from their hand. Altaria EX Humming Heal, which will allow you to heal 20 damage from each of your Pokemon. It also has Light Pulse. During your opponent's next turn, prevent all effects of attacks. These are all aggressive and also having control components in the effects. And then we have the currently popular, it's gaining popularity, Noivern EX. Covert Flight. During your next turn, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by basic Pokemon. Dominating Echo prevents your opponent from playing Special Energy or Stadium cards. So you can see, ladies and gentlemen, this card is mid, you might say, as far as its attacks. But if you get rid of the attacks and just focus on the effects, it's essentially a control card. So I don't see why aggro control shouldn't be a thing in the Pokemon TCG, since we have all these great examples. I think calling something aggro control adds more depth to the game and allows us to be more specific with what it is we want to do with our decks and how we play them. Thank you for listening. What did I miss? Where am I wrong? Please let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you want more control content. Please take care of yourselves, and may God bless you.